There is an image that stays with you long after the episode ends. It is quiet, clinical, and devastating. Steven Universe is sitting on an examination table in a doctor's office. His shirt is pulled up. His gem is exposed, that familiar pink diamond shape nestled into his navel, catching the fluorescent light. And across from him stands Dr. Priyanka Maheswaran, Connie's mother, holding a set of x-rays up to the light. Her face does something that doctors are trained never to let their faces do. It changes. It shifts from professional composure into something closer to horror, because the x-rays do not show a healthy skeleton. They show a skeleton that has been broken and healed, broken and healed, broken and healed, dozens of times over. Every bone tells a story. Every fracture line is a chapter in a life that no child should have lived. And the healing is perfect, almost instantaneous, the kind of healing that only a half-diamond hybrid could manage. But the damage is still there, recorded in calcium and cartilage, written into the architecture of his body. The bones remember. The body keeps the score. That image is from the 14th episode of Steven Universe Future, a limited series that aired on Cartoon Network between December the 7th, 2019 and March 27th, 2020, 20 episodes, each one 11 minutes long. And somehow, in that compact span, the show managed to do something that very few pieces of media have ever done. It depicted complex trauma with clinical accuracy, emotional honesty, and genuine compassion. It did this on a children's network. It did this in a cartoon about magical space rocks. And it did this so well that psychologists and therapists have written about it, taught with it, and recommended it to their patients. Tonight we are going to sit with that image. We are going to sit with Steven in that doctor's office, and we are going to trace the path that brought him there and the path that leads him out. We are going to look at Steven Universe Future through a clinical lens, through the language of psychology and trauma studies, and we are going to discover something remarkable. This is not just a good story about a boy who is struggling. This is one of the most accurate depictions of complex post-traumatic stress disorder ever put to screen. And the fact that it aired on Cartoon Network, sandwiched between commercials for cereal and toy commercials, makes it all the more extraordinary. If you are here to fall asleep, settle in. This is going to be a long one. Before we get into the psychology, let us take a moment to understand what Steven Universe Future actually is as a piece of television, because its format matters. The original Steven Universe series ran for 5 seasons, from 2013 to 2019, followed by a theatrical film, Steven Universe the Movie, in September 2019. By the end of that arc, the story appeared to be over. The diamonds had reformed, the corrupted gems had been healed, peace had been achieved across the galaxy. Steven had succeeded. He had done the impossible. He had resolved a millennia-old conflict through empathy and love. And then, 3 months after the movie, Future premiered, December 7th, 2019. It was announced not as a new season, but as a limited epilogue series. 20 episodes, each 11 minutes long. And from the very first frame, something was different. The opening sequence was not the bright, exuberant anthem of the original series. It was quieter, more uncertain. Steven was older, a little taller, a little broader, and the smile that had once been effortless now looks like it required effort. The series ran until March 27th, 2020, with its final 4 episodes airing as a single block. Little Homeschool, Guidance, Rosebuds, Volleyball, Bluebird. A very special episode. Snow Day, Why So Blue, Little Graduation, Prickly Pear, In Dreams, Bismuth Casual, Together Forever, Growing Pains, Mr. Universe, Fragments, Homeworld Bound, Everything's Fine, I Am My Monster, The Future. 20 episodes, 20 steps into the aftermath of heroism, 20 chapters in a story that the original series was not equipped to tell, the story of what comes after. And what comes after, it turns out, is the hardest part. There is a cultural assumption deeply embedded in the way we tell stories, that the end of conflict is the beginning of peace, that once the villain is defeated, the hero rides off into the sunset and everything is fine. This assumption is so pervasive that we rarely question it. We close the book, we watch the credits roll, we assume that the characters we love are going to be okay because the threat has been removed. But anyone who has lived through real hardship knows that this is not how it works. The end of a crisis is not the end of its effects. Soldiers come home from war and discover that the war has followed them. Survivors of abuse leave their abusers and discover that the abuse lives inside them still, encoded in their reflexes and their fears, and the way they flinch when someone raises their voice. The event ends, the aftermath does not. Steven Universe Future is, fundamentally, a story about the aftermath. It is a story that dares to ask the question that most hero narratives are too comfortable to confront. What happens to the hero after the heroism is done? What happens to the child soldier when the war is over? What happens to the body that has been broken and healed so many times that it no longer knows how to stop bracing for impact? The answer, as it turns out, is complicated and painful and absolutely necessary. Let us start with a term that most people have heard but few people truly understand. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The letters have become so common in our cultural vocabulary that they have almost lost their weight. People use them casually. They say they have PTSD from a bad haircut or a stressful exam. But clinical PTSD is not a metaphor. It is a specific, diagnosable condition with a specific set of symptoms, and it fundamentally changes the way a person experiences the world. PTSD, as it was originally defined, referred to the psychological aftermath of a single traumatic event. A car accident, an assault, a natural disaster, a combat experience. The diagnosis was built around the idea that a person encountered something so overwhelming, so far beyond the range of normal human experience, that their nervous system could not process it in the usual way. The memory of the event becomes stuck, like a splinter lodged beneath the skin. It does not fade, it does not integrate. It sits there, raw and immediate, and the body responds to reminders of it as though the event is happening again, right now, in this moment. But there is another form of trauma that does not fit neatly into that definition. It is not about a single event. It is about a pattern. It is about growing up in an environment where danger was constant, where safety was never guaranteed, where the people who were supposed to protect you were either unable or unwilling to do so. This is what psychologists call complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, and it is what Steven Universe has. CPTSD was first described by the psychiatrist Judith Herman in her 1992 book Trauma and Recovery. Herman argued that the existing diagnosis of PTSD was insufficient for people who had experienced prolonged, repeated trauma, particularly in childhood, particularly at the hands of caregivers. These individuals did not just have flashbacks and nightmares, they had a fundamentally altered sense of self. They struggled with emotional regulation, they had difficulty trusting others, they often felt a pervasive sense of shame, as though the trauma was somehow their fault. They had trouble maintaining stable relationships, and they frequently experienced dissociation, a feeling of being disconnected from their own body, their own emotions, their own life. Now let us think about Steven. Let us actually think about what his childhood looked like. Because we spent 5 seasons watching it, and because the show was bright and colourful and funny, it is easy to forget just how harrowing it actually was. Steven Universe was born without a mother. Rose Quartz gave up her physical form so that Steven could exist. From the very beginning, his existence was defined by loss. He was raised by 3 alien beings, the crystal gems, garnet, amethyst, and pearl, who loved him but were also grieving the loss of their leader and struggling with their own trauma. His father, Greg Universe, loved him too, but lived in a van and was largely unprepared for the realities of raising a half-human, half-gem child. There was no structured household, there was no school, there was no pediatrician, no routine, no normalcy. And then the mission started. Steven was a child when he began going on dangerous missions with the crystal gems. He was a child when he first encountered creatures that wanted to kill him. He was a child when he learned that his mother had been keeping secrets, enormous secrets, secrets that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about himself and his family. He was a child when he was kidnapped by homeworld gems. He was a child when he was put on trial. He was a child when he was trapped in an underwater prison. He was a child when he watched friends get hurt, get corrupted, get shattered. Let us be specific about some of these experiences, because the specificity matters. In the original series, Steven was trapped inside a bubble at the bottom of the ocean by lapis lazuli. He was held captive on a ship by Jasper. He was put on trial on homeworld for the crimes of his mother. He watched as his friends were poofed, destabilized, and nearly destroyed. He watched bismuth, a gem he loved and trusted, try to shatter him. He was nearly killed by eyeball ruby in the vacuum of space. He fell from great heights. He was crushed, burned, struck, and thrown. He had his gem pulled from his body, an experience so traumatic that it literally split him in two. And through all of this, he smiled. He made jokes. He sang songs. He told the people around him that he was fine, that he could handle it, that everything was going to be okay, because that was his role. That was what everyone needed him to be. The optimist, the one who believed things would work out, the light in the darkness. And no one stopped to ask what it was doing to him, because he was so good at performing that role that no one realized it was a performance. There is a term in psychology for this kind of chronic, repeated exposure to life-threatening situations during development. It is called developmental trauma, and it is distinct from the kind of trauma that adults experience because it occurs during a period when the brain and nervous system are still forming. A child's brain is not a miniature adult brain. It is a work in progress, a structure that is actively building itself based on the information it receives from the environment. And when the information it receives is danger, it builds itself accordingly. It builds a brain that is optimized for survival, a brain that is hypervigilant, reactive, and constantly primed for threats. A brain that is very good at detecting danger and very bad at resting, relaxing, and feeling safe. This is the brain that Steven has. A brain shaped by years of developmental trauma. A brain that learned, during the critical years of its formation, that the world is a dangerous place, and that the only way to survive is to be constantly on guard, constantly helpful, constantly ready to sacrifice yourself for others. This is not a choice Steven made. It is the architecture of his nervous system, built brick by every mission and every battle and every moment of terror that he experienced while his brain was still growing. He was a child. That is the part that is easy to forget. Through all of the original series, through all of the battles and the revelations and the cosmic scale conflicts, Steven was a child, and no one around him seemed to fully grasp what that meant. The gems treated him as a fellow warrior. The people of Beach City treated him as a local hero. His father treated him as someone who could handle whatever life threw at him. And Steven, because he had no frame of reference for what a normal childhood looked like, accepted all of this as simply the way things were. And perhaps the most devastating detail of all is that Steven did not have a choice. He did not volunteer for this life. He was born into it. The gems did not recruit him. They inherited him, and they needed him, not just as a child to love, but as a replacement for their fallen leader. From the moment Steven's powers began to manifest, he was placed on a trajectory that no child should have to walk. He was given responsibilities that would overwhelm an adult, and he was given them without training, without preparation, without even a clear explanation of what was happening to him. Consider the fact that Steven did not learn the full truth about his mother until well into the series. He was told that rose quartz shattered Pink Diamond. He based his understanding of himself and his heritage on that story. And then it was revealed that rose quartz was Pink Diamond, that the entire narrative he had been given was a lie, that the foundation of his identity, his mother's legacy, was built on deception. For a child, this kind of revelation is shattering. It does not just change what they know, it changes who they are. It destabilizes the very ground they stand on. And Steven had to process this alone while simultaneously managing a galaxy-spanning political crisis. There is a clinical term for this kind of chronic identity disruption. It is called ontological insecurity, a concept from the work of the psychiatrist R.D. Laing. It describes a state in which a person's basic sense of identity, their sense of who they are and where they fit in the world, is fundamentally unstable. For Steven, ontological insecurity is not just a symptom, it is a defining feature of his existence. He is half human and half gem. He is Steven, and he is also, in some sense, rose quartz. He is a child, and he is also a warrior. He is a healer, and he is also a diamond. These contradictions are baked into his being, and they create a chronic sense of uncertainty about who he fundamentally is. This is the foundation upon which Steven Universe Future is built. Not the victories, not the friendships, not the songs. The foundation is trauma, layer upon layer of it, accumulated over years, stored in the body, unprocessed and unacknowledged. And Future is the story of what happens when the battles end and the trauma remains. There is a concept in psychology called the window of tolerance. It was developed by the psychiatrist Daniel Siegel, and it describes the zone of emotional arousal in which a person can function effectively. When we are within our window of tolerance, we can think clearly, regulate our emotions, engage with others, and respond to stress in a proportionate way. When we are pushed outside of that window, either into hyper-arousal, too much activation, too much emotion, too much energy, or into hypoarousal, too little activation, numbness, shutdown, dissociation, we lose the ability to function. For most people, the window of tolerance is relatively wide. They can handle a range of emotional experiences without being overwhelmed. But for people who have experienced chronic trauma, particularly in childhood, the window of tolerance narrows, sometimes dramatically. Their nervous system becomes so sensitized to threat that even minor stressors can push them outside their window into panic or shutdown. They live on a razor's edge, always one trigger away from losing the ability to cope. Steven's window of tolerance, by the time Future begins, is almost non-existent. He has been pushed beyond it so many times, in so many ways for so many years, that his baseline state is one of chronic activation. He is always scanning for danger. He is always ready to respond. He is always at some level braced for impact. And the things that push him outside his window are no longer life-threatening situations. They are ordinary human experiences. A friend leaving for college, a gem who does not need his help, a conversation with his father. These are normal experiences, and Steven's body responds to them as though they are mortal threats. This is what hypervigilance looks like. Not the dramatic, cinematic version where a soldier dives under a table when a car backfires. The quiet, pervasive version where a person cannot relax in their own home, where every social interaction is shadowed by the unconscious question, am I safe here? Where the body is always a little tense, the heart always a little fast, the senses always a little too sharp. It is exhausting. It is invisible to everyone except the person experiencing it. And it is the daily reality of millions of people who grew up in environments that were never quite safe enough. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Let us talk about parentification. It is a term from family systems theory, coined by the Hungarian-American psychiatrist Ivan Bosormeny-Nagy, and it describes what happens when the roles of parent and child are reversed, when a child is forced to take on the emotional or practical responsibilities of an adult, when a child becomes the caregiver, the mediator, the emotional anchor for the people who are supposed to be caring for them. There are two types. Instrumental parentification is when a child takes on physical tasks, cooking, cleaning, managing the household, caring for younger siblings. Emotional parentification is when a child becomes the emotional support system for their parents or caregivers, absorbing their grief, managing their conflicts, providing comfort and reassurance that should be flowing in the other direction. Steven Universe is one of the most thoroughly parentified characters in the history of fiction, and the genius of the show is that it never frames it that way during the original series. It frames it as heroism, it frames it as compassion, it frames it as Steven being a good person, and he is a good person. That is not in question. But the show, particularly in Future, asks us to look at that goodness through a different lens and to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. What does it cost a child to be that good, that early, for that long? Think about what Steven does, not in battle, but in the quiet moments. He mediates conflicts between the gems. When Pearl is consumed by grief over Rose, Steven comforts her. When Amethyst is struggling with feelings of inadequacy, Steven reassures her. When Garnet splits apart due to a crisis of trust, Steven brings her back together. He is the emotional center of the crystal gems, the person everyone turns to when things fall apart, and he is a child. He does this with the Homeworld gems too. He empathizes with Lapis Lazuli, a deeply traumatized gem who has been imprisoned for thousands of years. He reaches out to Peridot, who was raised in a culture of rigid hierarchy and control. He even extends compassion to the Diamonds, the tyrannical rulers who caused untold suffering across the galaxy. He does not just fight them, he talks to them, he listens to them, he tries to understand them. He takes their pain into himself and helps them process it. This is not normal behavior for a child. This is the behavior of a parentified child, a child who has learned at a deep and unconscious level that their value is contingent on their ability to help others, to fix things, to absorb the emotions that the adults in their life cannot manage on their own. The parentified child does not develop a robust sense of self because they are too busy constructing a self that is useful to others. Their identity becomes their function. They are the helper, the healer, the peacemaker, and if they ever stop helping, ever stop healing, ever stop making peace, they feel as though they have no reason to exist. This is exactly what happens to Steven in Future. The era of conflict is over. The Diamonds have reformed. The corrupted gems have been healed. Little Homeschool has been established to help gems adjust to life on Earth. Peace has been achieved. And Steven, the boy whose entire identity was built around helping others, suddenly has no one left to help. Watch the early episodes of Future carefully. Steven is running Little Homeschool, trying to teach gems how to live on Earth, but something is off. He is pushing too hard. He is too invested in the outcomes. When a gem does not want to be helped, or when they find their own path without his guidance, he does not feel relief. He feels rejection. He feels purposeless. Because helping was never just something he did. It was who he was. And without it, he does not know who he is. The psychology here is precise. Research on parentification has shown that parentified children often develop what clinicians call a compulsive caregiving style. They are drawn to helping professions and helping roles. They seek out people who need them. They feel most comfortable, most alive, most like themselves when they are taking care of someone else. But this comes at a cost. Because they were never allowed to have their own needs met, they often do not know what their own needs are. They have spent so long attending to the emotions of others that they have lost touch with their own. This is Steven in the early episodes of Future. He is restless, agitated, subtly desperate. He keeps inserting himself into other people's problems, and when those people turn out not to need him, or worse, when they actively push him away, he spirals. Not dramatically, not at first, but the cracks are there if you know where to look. And here is the thing that makes this portrayal so devastating. The show does not villainize the people who parentified Steven. Greg is not a bad father. He is a loving, well-meaning man who is in over his head. The crystal gems are not bad guardians. They love Steven fiercely and would die to protect him. But love and good intentions are not enough to prevent parentification. Sometimes it happens not because the adults are cruel, but because the adults are broken, and the child is the only one in the room with enough emotional intelligence to hold things together. In the episode titled Mr. Universe, Steven and Greg go on a road trip, and Steven finally confronts his father about his upbringing. He learns that Greg grew up with strict, controlling parents, and that Greg deliberately chose to raise Steven without any of those structures, without school, without doctors, without rules, because he associated structure with oppression. Greg thought he was giving Steven freedom, but what he actually gave Steven was a childhood without boundaries, without scaffolding, without the support systems that children need in order to develop a stable sense sense of self. Steven's reaction is not gratitude, it is fury, because he understands for the first time that his father's definition of freedom was actually a form of neglect. Not malicious neglect, but neglect all the same. He never went to school, he never had a regular doctor, he never had the things that ordinary children take for granted. And when he looks at Greg's story of rebellion against his own parents, he does not see liberation. He sees a man who was so focused on not repeating his own parents' mistakes that he made entirely new ones. This scene is psychologically devastating because it captures something that is very real and very common. Intergenerational trauma does not always repeat in the same form. Sometimes it inverts. A parent who is controlled becomes permissive. A parent who is neglected becomes smothering. The trauma finds a new shape, but it persists, and the child once again bears the cost. And this is where we should acknowledge something about Greg that the show handles with incredible nuance. Greg is not a villain. He is one of the most genuinely loving fathers in all of animation. He adores Steven. He would do anything for him, and that is precisely what makes the Mr. Universe episode so heartbreaking. Because it is not a story about a bad parent being confronted by their child. It is a story about a good parent being confronted with the fact that good intentions are not enough. Greg looked at his own childhood, a childhood of strict rules and rigid expectations, and he decided to do the opposite. He gave Steven complete freedom, no school, no structure, no conventional childhood milestones. And on the surface, that sounds beautiful. It sounds like liberation, but freedom without support is not freedom. It is abandonment with a friendlier name. A child needs structure, not because structure is pleasant, but because structure is how a developing brain learns to organize the world. It is how a child learns cause and effect, learns to predict outcomes, learns to feel safe. Without it, the world feels random and uncontrollable, and a world that feels random and uncontrollable is, by definition, a world that feels dangerous. Steven never went to school. He never had regular medical checkups. He never had the mundane, stabilizing rituals of childhood, the bedtime routines and the homework schedules and the annual physicals that most children take for granted. And in the place of those things, he had magical missions and alien wars and existential crises about the nature of his own identity. He had adventure where he should have had algebra. He had cosmic battles where he should have had birthday parties. The show does not condemn Greg for this. It does not even blame him exactly. It simply shows the consequences. It shows Steven sitting in a van, looking at his father, and realizing that the man he loves made choices that hurt him, not out of cruelty, out of ignorance, out of the particular blindness that comes from having your own unprocessed trauma. And Steven's reaction, the ripping of the steering wheel, the crash, is not calculated violence. It is the eruption of a truth that has been building for years. You were supposed to take care of me, and you did not know how. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now let us talk about one of the most important and least understood aspects of Steven's psychology, the fawn response. Most people are familiar with the concept of fight or flight. When we encounter a threat, our nervous system activates, flooding our body with adrenaline and cortisol, and we either stand our ground and fight or we run. This is a survival mechanism hardwired into our biology, and it has kept our species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. In recent decades, psychologists have expanded this model. It is not just fight or flight, it is fight, flight, freeze and fawn. The freeze response is when a person becomes immobilized in the face of threat, unable to act, unable to think, locked in place. It is the deer in headlights. It is dissociation, leaving the body because the body is not safe. And then there is fawning. The fawn response was identified and named by the therapist Pete Walker in his work on complex PTSD. Walker described fawning as a survival strategy in which a person responds to threat by becoming excessively accommodating, by merging with the needs and desires of the threatening person, by making themselves useful, agreeable, and non-threatening in order to avoid conflict protect and ensure their own safety. The fawn response is the trauma response that gets mistaken for virtue because it looks like kindness, it looks like empathy, it looks like compassion and generosity and selflessness. A person who fawns does not look like someone who is struggling. They look like the nicest person in the room. They look like the person who always has time for you, who always puts others first, who never seems to have problems of their own. They look, in other words, exactly like Steven Universe. Think about how Steven responds to threats throughout the original series. He does not primarily fight. He does not primarily flee. He does not freeze. He talks. He empathizes. He reaches out. He tries to understand the other person's perspective. He heals. He hugs. He cries. He makes himself vulnerable in the face of danger, not as a strategic choice, but as an instinctive response. His first impulse when confronted with someone who wants to hurt him is to ask why they are hurting. This is presented throughout the original series as Steven's greatest strength, and in many ways, it is. His ability to empathize with others, to see the pain beneath the aggression, is what ultimately resolves the conflict with the diamonds. It is what saves the corrupted gems. It is what heals centuries of intergalactic trauma. Steven's superpower is his capacity for connection, but Future asks us to consider the possibility that this superpower is also a trauma response. That Steven does not empathize with dangerous people because he is exceptionally good. He empathizes with them because at a deep and unconscious level, he has learned that empathy is how you survive. Children who grow up in unstable or threatening environments often develop the fawn response as their primary coping mechanism. They learn to read the emotions of the adults around them with extraordinary precision. They learn to anticipate anger before it arrives. They learn to de-escalate conflict before it erupts. They learn to make themselves small and accommodating and useful because in their world, the alternative is danger. They become emotional chameleons, shifting their behavior to match whatever the situation demands, always prioritizing the other person's comfort, always suppressing their own needs. Pete Walker wrote that fawn types seek safety by merging with the wishes, needs and demands of others. They lose themselves in the process. Their own desires, their own opinions, their own emotions become secondary, and over time, they may lose access to those things entirely. They do not know what they want because they have never been allowed to want. They do not know what they feel because their feelings were never the priority. This is Steven. This has always been Steven. And Future is the story of what happens when the fawn response stops working. When the threats are gone, when the people around him no longer need saving, and Steven is left alone with a nervous system that is still scanning for danger, still bracing for impact, still desperately trying to be useful in a world that no longer requires his particular brand of sacrifice. The fawn response is also connected to something clinicians call codependency. Steven does not just help people, he needs to help people. His sense of self is so thoroughly intertwined with his role as helper and healer that when that role is taken away, he experiences something close to an identity crisis. In the early episodes of Future, we see him clinging to that role, inserting himself into situations where he is not needed, becoming agitated when people solve their own problems. This is not altruism, this is dependency, a dependency on being depended upon, and it is one of the hallmarks of the parentified, fawning child. Let us pause here for a moment and sit with something uncomfortable, because what we are describing is not just a character analysis, it is a reality for millions of people. There are people listening to this right now who recognize themselves in Steven. People who have spent their lives being told that they are so kind, so selfless, so good at taking care of others, and who have never been asked but who takes care of you. People who do not know how to stop helping because they do not know who they are without it. People whose greatest strength is also their deepest wound. Steven Universe Future sees those people. It sees them clearly and without judgment, and that is what makes it remarkable. There is another dimension to the fawn response that deserves attention, and it is particularly relevant to Steven. It is the relationship between fawning and identity. When your primary way of relating to the world is through accommodating others, you develop what some psychologists call a false self. This is a concept that originated with the British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, who described the false self as a defensive facade that develops when a child learns that their authentic feelings and impulses are unwelcome or dangerous. The child learns to present a version of themselves that is acceptable to their caregivers, and over time, that performance becomes so habitual that they lose access to the genuine self underneath. Steven's false self is the hero, the healer, the boy who always knows what to say, who always puts others first, who always has a solution. This is the Steven that everyone loves. This is the Steven that the crystal gems depend on, that Beach City celebrates, that the diamonds eventually come to respect, and it is not entirely false. Steven genuinely is kind, he genuinely does care. But the compulsive nature of his kindness, the way it extends to every situation regardless of personal cost, the way it leaves no room for his own anger, his own sadness, his own needs, that is the false self at work. That is the performance of a child who learned very early that his value was determined by his usefulness. In the original series, this performance works. It works brilliantly, in fact. It resolves conflicts. It heals corruption. It ends wars. But performance has a shelf life. The energy required to maintain a false self is enormous, and it increases over time, because the gap between the performance and the reality grows wider with every passing day. The more Steven smiles, the more pain he is hiding. The more he helps others, the more neglected his own wounds become. The more he performs the role of the person who has it all together, the further he drifts from the truth of his own experience. Future is the story of that performance collapsing. And when it collapses, what emerges is not the calm, compassionate Steven that everyone knows. What emerges is the real Steven, the angry, frightened, exhausted, grieving, overwhelmed Steven, the Steven who has been hiding behind the false self for so long that neither he nor anyone around him knows what to do with the person underneath. There is also the matter of Steven's relationship with Connie and how it illuminates his psychology. In episode 13, Together Forever, Steven proposes to Connie. He sets up a romantic picnic on the beach, at the exact spot where they first met back in the original series. He sings her a love song. He presents a glow stick bracelet as a ring. It is earnest and sweet and deeply, desperately sad. Because Steven is not proposing out of love, not entirely. He is proposing out of terror. Connie has been accepted to college. She is planning her future. She is moving forward. And Steven, who has no plan, no direction, no sense of who he is outside of his relationships, is terrified of being left behind. The proposal is an attempt to fuse his future with hers, literally and figuratively. It is an attempt to avoid the terrifying question of what he is going to do with his life by making his life about her. Connie says no. She says it gently, with love, but she says it, and she explains why. She does not want to be Stevoni forever. She does not want to lose herself in fusion, in merger, in the dissolution of individual identity that fusion represents. She wants to be Connie. She wants to go to college. She wants to have her own life, her own goals, her own future, and she wants Steven to have those things too. This is one of the most mature and psychologically literate scenes in the entire series. Because Connie is not rejecting Steven, she is rejecting codependency. She is rejecting the idea that love means merging, means losing yourself in another person, means giving up your individual identity in service of the relationship. And Steven, who has spent his entire life merging with others, who does not know where he ends and other people begin, does not understand. He cannot understand. Because for him, merger is not a choice. It is a survival strategy. It is the only way he knows how to feel safe. There is a psychological concept that illuminates this dynamic perfectly. It is called enmeshment. Enmeshment occurs when the boundaries between individuals become so blurred that they lose the ability to function as separate people. In enmeshed relationships, the emotions of one person become indistinguishable from the emotions of another. Their needs become tangled, their identities merge, and the idea of separating, of existing as an autonomous individual, feels not just frightening frightening, but impossible. Steven has been enmeshed with the crystal gems for his entire life. He has been enmeshed with the cause, with the mission, with the role of healer and saviour, and his proposal to Connie is an attempt to extend that enmeshment into his romantic life, to merge with Connie so completely that he never has to face the terrifying prospect of standing alone. Fusion, in the Steven universe mythology, is a literal manifestation of enmeshment. Two beings become one. Boundaries dissolve. Individual identity gives way to shared identity. And for Steven, who has never had a stable individual identity to begin with, the appeal of permanent fusion is obvious. It is not about romance. It is about escape. Escape from the void at the centre of his selfhood. Connie's refusal is therefore not just a romantic setback. It is an existential one. She is telling Steven that she will not fill the void for him, that he has to fill it himself, and that is the one thing he does not know how to do. The rejection sends Steven spiralling, not because he does not respect Connie's decision, but because her decision forces him to confront the void at the centre of his identity. If he is not with Connie, who is he? If he is not helping the gems, who is he? If he is not saving the world, who is he? These questions terrify him because he does not have answers. The false self, the hero, the healer has no answers for these questions. And the real self, buried under years of performance, is too wounded and too unfamiliar to speak. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now we arrive at the episode that gives this entire analysis its title, the episode that makes the subtext explicit, the episode that takes everything we have been discussing and puts it in clinical language. Growing Pains. Episode 14. Steven has been turning pink. His powers have been acting up. He is swelling, glowing, losing control of his abilities in moments of emotional distress. After a particularly bad episode, he ends up in the hospital and Dr. Priyanka Maheswaran examines him, and what she finds changes everything. The X-rays show a body that has been through extraordinary physical trauma, bones that have broken and healed over and over again. The healing is flawless, every fracture perfectly repaired, but the evidence remains. Steven's body has recorded every injury he has ever sustained, every fall, every fight, every near-death experience. His skeleton is a map of his childhood, and it is not the map of a child who played in parks and climbed trees. It is the map of a soldier. Dr. Maheswaran explains what is happening to Steven in language that is drawn directly from real trauma psychology. She talks about adverse childhood experiences. She explains that when a child grows up in an environment of chronic stress and danger, their body adapts. The stress response system, the network of hormones and neurotransmitters that govern our fight or flight reactions, becomes permanently altered. It becomes hypersensitive. It begins to respond to minor threats as though they are major ones. The body does not distinguish between a life-threatening situation and a stressful conversation. It reacts to both with the same cascade of cortisol and adrenaline, the same racing heart, the same clenched muscles, the same overwhelming sense of danger. This is what is happening to Steven. His body has been through so much genuine danger that it has lost the ability to distinguish between danger and discomfort. His stress response is stuck in the on position. Every frustration, every disappointment, every moment of emotional distress triggers the same physiological cascade that once saved his life in battle. He is living in a state of chronic hyperarousal, and his gem powers, which are tied to his emotions, are amplifying that response into something visible and destructive. He turns pink, he swells, he creates barriers, his powers lash out, his body is screaming what his mind cannot articulate. I am not safe. I have never been safe, and I do not know how to stop being afraid. This is where the title of Bessel van der Kolk's landmark book becomes more than a metaphor. The body keeps the score. Published in 2014, the book argued that trauma is not just a psychological phenomenon, it is a physical one. Traumatic experiences are stored not just in the mind, but in the body itself, in the nervous system, in the muscles, in the very architecture of the brain. Van der Kolk documented how trauma literally reshapes the brain, compromising the areas responsible for self-regulation, pleasure, engagement, and trust. He showed that traumatic memories are not stored in the same way as ordinary memories. They are not neatly filed away in the past. They live in the present, in the body, ready to be triggered at any moment. Steven's bones are a literal manifestation of this concept. His body has kept the score. Every injury, every battle, every moment of fear and pain has been recorded in his skeleton, and even though his gem abilities healed the physical damage, the record remains. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Dr. Maheswaran uses the term adverse childhood experiences in her explanation to Steven. This is a real clinical concept developed through the ACE study, one of the largest investigations of childhood trauma ever conducted. The original study was carried out by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente between 1995 and 1997, involving over 17,000 participants. It examined the relationship between childhood trauma and adult health outcomes, and its findings were staggering. The study identified 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, including physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, parental separation, and exposure to domestic violence. Each category a participant experienced counted as 1 point on their ACE score, and the research showed a clear, dose-dependent relationship between ACE scores and negative health outcomes. The higher the score, the greater the risk of heart disease, diabetes, depression, substance abuse, and early death. If we were to calculate Steven's ACE score, it would be extraordinary. Loss of a parent, check. Exposure to violence, check. Chronic fear for personal safety, check. Emotional neglect, not through malice, but through the inability of his caregivers to provide age-appropriate emotional support, check. Household instability, check. Steven would score high enough to place him in the most at-risk category for virtually every negative outcome the study measured, and the show knows this. The show is not accidentally depicting these dynamics. Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, has spoken openly about how personal experience with trauma shaped the series. Sugar was influenced by the book The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, which describes the experience of toxic stress and its impact on development. Sugar has spoken about her own experience with assault and the aftermath of trauma, and how those experiences informed Steven's arc in future. This is a show that was built with intention, with research, with a genuine desire to depict trauma honestly and to show that healing is possible. The scene in the doctor's office is the emotional center of Steven Universe Future. It is the moment when the show says, out loud, what it has been implying for 20 episodes. Steven is not just stressed. He is not just having a bad day. He is traumatized. His body is keeping the score. And unless he confronts that trauma, unless he finds a way to process what has happened to him, it will destroy him. There is a line in Growing Pains that deserves special attention. Steven asks with genuine confusion and fear how he is supposed to live his life if it always feels like he is about to die. This is not a dramatic exaggeration. This is a precise description of what chronic hyperarousal feels like. For people with CPTSD, the feeling of imminent danger does not go away when the danger does. It persists. It colours everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every quiet moment alone is underscored by a low, constant hum of dread. The body does not believe that the war is over. The body is still fighting. And Steven's question, how do I live like this, is the question that drives the rest of the series. It is the question that every trauma survivor eventually has to ask. And the answer is not simple, and it is not quick, and it is not a single heroic moment. The answer is slow and messy and requires help. And that, as we will see, is the hardest thing of all for Steven to accept. It is also worth pausing to appreciate the specificity of the show's clinical language. Dr. Maheswaran does not use vague or metaphorical terms. She uses the phrase adverse childhood experiences. She describes the mechanics of the stress response system. She explains how chronic exposure to danger recalibrates the body's threat assessment. This is not a writer's approximation of psychology. This is accurate clinical language delivered by a medical professional in a children's cartoon. The show trusted its audience to handle real information, and that trust elevates the entire scene from a dramatic moment to an educational 1. Rebecca Sugar has spoken about the influence of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris's book, The Deepest Well, on the development of this storyline. Burke-Harris was a pediatrician who became one of the leading researchers on the long-term effects of adverse childhood experiences on physical health. Her work built on the original ACE study and focused particularly on how toxic stress in childhood alters the developing brain and body. She described how children who grow up in environments of chronic stress develop overactive stress response systems that increase their risk for a wide range of health problems, from heart disease to autoimmune disorders to mental illness. Sugar has spoken about how reading Burke-Harris's work resonated with her own experience. Sugar was assaulted when she was 22 years old, and she has described the aftermath of that experience, the way her body seemed to hold onto the trauma, even when her mind tried to move past it, as a direct influence on Steven's arc in Future. The show is not just informed by psychological research, it is informed by lived experience. And that combination of clinical accuracy and personal truth is what gives the Growing Pains episode its extraordinary power. There is one more clinical concept embedded in this episode that we should discuss, and it is the concept of hyperarousal. When the stress response system is chronically activated, the body exists in a state of constant readiness. The heart rate is elevated, the muscles are tense, the senses are sharpened, the body is primed to detect and respond to threat at all times. This state is enormously taxing on the body. It is like running an engine at redline, constantly. Eventually, something breaks. For Steven, the breaking manifests through his gem powers, but for real people, chronic hyperarousal manifests through the body in other ways. Chronic pain, digestive problems, headaches, insomnia, autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular disease. The body, kept in a constant state of high alert, begins to deteriorate. Van der Kolk documented this in his research, showing that trauma survivors have measurably different physiological profiles than people who have not experienced trauma. Their cortisol levels are different, their brain structures are different, their immune function is different. Trauma is not just in the mind, it is in every cell of the body. Steven's pink episodes are a visualization of chronic hyperarousal. When he turns pink, he is not just expressing an emotion, he is expressing a physiological state. His body is flooding with the gem equivalent of stress hormones. His powers are activating as though he is in mortal danger, and his conscious mind has no ability to override the process. He cannot simply calm down, he cannot just relax. The system is beyond his voluntary control because it is operating at a level beneath conscious awareness. It is the brainstem, not the prefrontal cortex. It is survival, not choice. This distinction is crucial, and the show handles it with remarkable care. Nobody tells Steven to just calm down. Nobody suggests that he should simply choose to feel differently. Dr. Maheswaran explains the mechanism and acknowledges that it is not something he can control through willpower alone. This is an incredibly important message for the show's audience, because one of the most damaging myths about mental health is that people can simply choose to feel better. They cannot. Not when their nervous system has been fundamentally altered by trauma. Healing requires intervention. It requires support. It requires often professional help. And even then, it is slow and difficult and non-linear. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Let us talk about compassion fatigue. It is a term that originated in the study of healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, therapists, first responders, people whose jobs require them to witness and absorb the suffering of others on a daily basis. The term was coined in 1992 by a nurse researcher named Carla Jointson to describe the negative impact that repeated exposure to patient emergencies was having on hospital nurses. Compassion fatigue is not the same as burnout, although the two are often confused. Burnout is gradual. It is the slow erosion of energy and enthusiasm symptom that comes from working too hard for too long. Compassion fatigue is more sudden, more specific. It is what happens when the act of caring itself becomes painful, when the well of empathy runs dry, when the person who has spent their life absorbing the pain of others reaches a point where they simply cannot absorb anymore. The symptoms of compassion fatigue include emotional numbness, irritability, withdrawal from relationships, a diminished ability to feel empathy, difficulty making decisions, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness. The person who once felt deeply now feels nothing, or feels only anger, or feels only exhaustion. Their capacity for connection, which was once their greatest asset, has been depleted. Steven Universe spent 5 seasons being the emotional anchor for everyone around him. He absorbed the grief of Pearl, the insecurity of Amethyst, the rigidity of Garnet. He absorbed the trauma of Lapis Lazuli, the confusion of Peridot, the rage of Jasper. He absorbed the guilt of the diamonds, the fear of the corrupted gems, the anxiety of the citizens of Beach City. He took it all in, processed it, transformed it, and gave back love and understanding for years. And now in future, he has nothing left. There is a metaphor that therapists sometimes use to describe this phenomenon. They talk about a cup. Everyone has a cup, and the cup holds their emotional capacity, their ability to feel and to care and to connect. Over the course of a day or a week or a year, the cup fills. Stress adds to it, grief adds to it, other people's pain adds to it, and usually there are mechanisms to empty the cup. Sleep, rest, connection, joy, therapy, exercise, the things we do to process and release the accumulated weight of caring. But Steven never emptied his cup. There was never time. There was always another mission, another crisis, another person who needed him. And so the cup filled and filled and filled. And because Steven is who he is, because his gem powers allowed him to keep functioning, even when an ordinary person would have collapsed, the cup did not just fill to the brim, it overflowed. And what happens when a cup overflows is not dramatic. It is slow and messy and continuous. It is a steady drip of emotional exhaustion that stains everything it touches. In psychological terms, this is the point at which compassion fatigue becomes something more severe. It becomes secondary traumatic stress, the condition in which the person absorbing others' trauma begins to develop trauma symptoms of their own. Steven is not just tired of caring, he is traumatized by caring. The act of absorbing everyone else's pain has left its own marks on his psyche, layered on top of the marks left by his own experiences, until the distinction between his trauma and everyone else's trauma becomes impossible to draw. This is what the early episodes of Future are depicting, even before the pink episodes begin, even before the doctor's visit, even before the crisis. Steven is emotionally depleted. He is running on fumes. He keeps trying to do the thing that has always worked. Keep helping, keep empathizing, keep being the person who holds everyone together. But the engine is empty. He cannot feel what he used to feel. He cannot connect the way he used to connect. And because his entire identity is built around his ability to care for others, the loss of that ability feels like the loss of himself. There is a beautiful and terrible irony in this. The thing that made Steven special, his extraordinary capacity for empathy, is the thing that is destroying him. He gave too much for too long, and now there is nothing left. He is the helper who cannot be helped, not because help is unavailable, but because he does not know how to receive it. He has spent his entire life in the caregiver role. He does not have the emotional vocabulary for vulnerability. He does not know how to say, I am in pain and I need someone to take care of me, because that was never his part. His part was to take care of others. This is a dynamic that therapists see frequently in people who grew up as parentified children. They are excellent at caring for others. They are attuned to the emotional needs of the people around them. They can walk into a room and immediately sense who is struggling and what they need, but they are catastrophically bad at caring for themselves. They do not recognize their own needs. They do not know how to ask for help. And when someone offers help, they deflect, minimize, or redirect the conversation back to the other person, because in their internal model of the world, they are the caregiver. They are never the one being cared for. In the episode Prickly Pear, Steven creates a sentient cactus by accidentally infusing a plant with his healing spit. He names it Cactus Steven, and he begins talking to it, venting his frustrations in a way that he cannot do with the people in his life. He tells the cactus what he really feels about the gems, about his situation, about his growing sense of purposelessness and frustration. And the cactus, because it learns through imitation, begins repeating his words back to him, amplified and distorted. This episode is a perfect metaphor for what happens when emotions are suppressed. They do not disappear, they find another outlet. Steven cannot tell the gems how he feels because he is too invested in being the person who holds things together. So he tells a plant, and the plant, like the repressed emotions themselves, grows out of control and becomes dangerous. The feelings that Steven cannot express become something that hurts him and the people around him. This is somatization in another form. When the mind cannot process an emotion, the body finds a way to express it. For Steven, it is turning pink. It is his powers going haywire. It is a sentient cactus rampaging through the house. For people in the real world, it is headaches and stomach problems and chronic pain and panic attacks and 100 other ways that the body says what the mouth cannot. The Prickly Pear episode also introduces an important concept about emotional avoidance. Steven does not talk to his friends because he does not want to burden them. This is a common pattern in people who have been parentified. They have internalized the belief that their emotions are a burden, that expressing their own pain is selfish, that their role is to absorb rather than to express. So they find substitutes. They write in journals that no one reads, they talk to pets, they confide in strangers on the internet. They do anything to avoid the vulnerability of telling the people closest to them that they are in pain. And the irony is devastating. Steven, who has spent his entire life encouraging others to share their feelings, to be vulnerable, to ask for help, cannot do it himself. He can give that advice endlessly. He can model that behavior for others. But when it comes to his own emotions, he is locked. The door is sealed from the inside. And the cactus, the plant he accidentally brought to life with his healing spit, becomes a living metaphor for what happens when you try to confide your pain in something that cannot actually help you. It repeats your words back to you, distorted and amplified, and then it grows out of control and starts hurting people, which is, of course, exactly what happens when suppressed emotions are left to fester. There is something else worth discussing here, and it relates to the concept of trauma bonding. Throughout the original series, many of Steven's most significant relationships are forged in crisis. His bond with Lapis is born from her imprisonment and his compassion. His bond with Peridot is born from conflict and eventual understanding. His bond with the diamonds is born from confrontation. Even his relationship with Connie begins when they are trapped together in a dangerous situation. This means that Steven's model of connection is intimately tied to crisis. He knows how to bond with someone when they are in danger. He knows how to connect when someone is in pain. What he does not know, what he has never learned, is how to connect in ordinary circumstances, how to be friends with someone when there is nothing to fight, how to love someone when there is nothing to heal. The peacetime of Future robs him not just of his purpose, but of his primary method of forming connections. He is a wartime healer stranded in peacetime, and he does not know the language of peace. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Let us talk about what happens when the fawn response fails. Because it does fail. It always fails eventually. The fawn response is a survival strategy, not a sustainable way of living, and it is built on a foundation that cannot hold. It requires the person to constantly suppress their own needs, to constantly prioritize others, to constantly perform a version of themselves that is accommodating and useful and non-threatening. And eventually the suppressed self rebels. In Pete Walker's framework, when a person's primary trauma response breaks down, they do not simply return to a neutral state. They crash into one of the other responses. A fawner whose system gives out may suddenly shift into fight mode, expressing all the anger and resentment that they have been swallowing for years. Or they may shift into freeze, dissociating from their emotions and their body, retreating into a numbed-out state of disconnection. Or they may cycle rapidly between all four responses: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, unable to stabilize, unable to find ground. Steven Universe Future depicts this cycle with stunning precision. As the series progresses, we watch Steven's fawn response deteriorate. The boy who once resolved every conflict through empathy and connection begins losing control. He turns pink, he snaps at people, he becomes controlling and rigid, his powers lash out. He cycles between trying to help everyone, desperate attempts at fawning, and explosive moments of anger, the fight response breaking through the surface. The emotional dysregulation that Steven exhibits is a hallmark of CPTSD. It is the inability to modulate emotional responses in a healthy way. A person with emotional dysregulation does not simply feel anger, they are consumed by it. They do not simply feel sadness, they are drowned in it. Their emotions are too big, too fast, too intense, and they do not have the internal resources to manage them. For Steven, this dysregulation is made visible through his gem powers. When he is stressed, he turns pink. When he is overwhelmed, he swells. When he is angry, he creates barriers. When he is terrified, he loses control of his abilities entirely. The show takes an internal, invisible experience, the chaos of dysregulated emotions, and makes it external and visible. You can see Steven's trauma. You can see it in the colour of his skin, in the size of his body, in the destruction left in his wake. There is a moment in the series that captures this dysregulation perfectly. In the episode Snow Day, the crystal gems try to engage Steven in a game of Steven Tag, a game they used to play when he was younger. It is a light, nostalgic moment, and the gems are clearly trying to connect with him, to recapture something of the joy they once shared. But Steven cannot access that joy. He is too wound up, too tightly coiled, too far outside his window of tolerance. The game that once brought him happiness now feels like an invasion. The gems shape-shifting into his younger form feels like a reminder that he is no longer the person they remember, and he does not know who he has become instead. This is a small moment, but it is clinically precise. One of the symptoms of CPTSD is an inability to experience positive emotions. It is not that the person does not want to feel joy. It is that their nervous system is so dominated by the stress response that there is no room for anything else. The emotional bandwidth is consumed by vigilance and anxiety, and there is nothing left over for pleasure, for play, for the kind of spontaneous happiness that most people take for granted. Steven cannot play Steven Tag because Steven is no longer capable of play. His nervous system will not allow it. The boy who once found joy in everything now finds it in nothing, and the absence of joy is, in its own way, as devastating as the presence of pain. This is one of the most effective narrative choices in the entire series. Because trauma is usually invisible, people with CPTSD often look fine on the outside. They go to work, they maintain relationships, they smile and say they are okay. And all the while, inside they are screaming. Steven Universe Future makes the screaming visible. It puts it on the screen in pink light and crackling energy, and a body that will not stay the right size. It says this is what it looks like. This is what it actually looks like when someone is falling apart. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now we need to talk about episode 18, Everything's Fine, and despite its title, nothing is fine. By this point in the series, Steven has been through a gauntlet. He has confronted his father about his upbringing. He has shattered Jasper. He has gone to Homeworld and nearly attacked White Diamond. He is unraveling, and everyone around him can see it. But Steven cannot see it, or rather he will not see it, because seeing it would mean admitting something that his entire psyche is organised around denying, that he is broken, that he needs help, that he cannot fix this by himself. Everything's Fine is an episode about denial, but it is not the simple denial of someone who does not want to face a difficult truth. It is the desperate, white-knuckled denial of someone who cannot face it. Someone whose entire identity, whose entire sense of self is built on the premise that they are okay, that they are in control, that they are the person who helps others and does not need help themselves. For Steven to admit that he is not fine would be to collapse the entire structure of who he believes himself to be. And so he performs, he smiles, he cooks breakfast, he goes about his day as though nothing has happened, as though he did not just shatter another living being, as though his body is not literally betraying him with every passing hour. This is what psychologists call dissociation in its milder forms. It is not the dramatic, split personality dissociation of popular culture. It is something quieter and more insidious. It is the act of disconnecting from your own emotional reality. It is watching yourself from a distance, going through the motions, performing the role of a person who is okay while the actual you retreats further and further from the surface. It is a defense mechanism, one of the oldest and most primal. When reality becomes too painful to inhabit, the mind creates a buffer. It steps back, it watches, it narrates, but it does not feel, because feeling would be unbearable. Steven, in Everything's Fine, dissociating. He is performing normalcy with a manic intensity that is disturbing to watch. He bakes cookies, he visits little homeschool, he smiles so hard it looks like it hurts, and all the while the camera catches glimpses of something else beneath the surface. Moments where the smile falters, moments where his eyes go flat, moments where you can see the person behind the performance, and that person is terrified. The episode builds to a climax in which Steven catches his reflection and sees diamond-shaped pupils staring back at him. He sees himself becoming the thing he fears most, a diamond, an oppressor, a monster, and the realization breaks through the dissociation like water through a crack in a dam. All of the emotions he had been holding back, the guilt, the shame, the rage, the fear, the grief, come flooding in at once. He confesses everything. He tells the gems what he has done. He tells them about Jasper. He tells them about White Diamond. And as he speaks, his body begins to change. Spikes erupt from his back, tearing through his shirt. His form destabilizes. The body once again is keeping the score, and this time it has more to say than Steven can contain. Now we must talk about fragments. Episode 16, because this is the episode that breaks the pattern. This is the episode where the fawn response does not just fail, it inverts. Steven, overwhelmed and desperate for control, seeks out Jasper. He asks her to train him, not in empathy, not in connection, not in any of the skills that have defined him for the entire series. He asks her to train him to fight. He asks her to teach him to use his power, not to heal, but to dominate. He is, for the first time in his life, embracing the fight response. Jasper is delighted. She is a warrior, born for combat, and she sees in Steven a potential that excites her. She pushes him, she provokes him, she teaches him to embrace his anger instead of suppressing it. And Steven, who has been suppressing his anger for his entire life, discovers that it feels good, it feels powerful, it feels like relief. After years of fawning, of accommodating, of swallowing his own needs in order to take care of others, the act of fighting back is intoxicating. But it goes too far, because anger that has been suppressed for that long does not come out in measured doses. It comes out in a flood. Steven and Jasper spar, and Steven's power escalates beyond his control. He is not fighting anymore. He is raging. He is releasing everything he has held back, every frustration, every resentment, every moment of pain that he smiled through and pretended was fine. And in the climax of the fight, he does the unthinkable. He shatters Jasper. He kills her. It is temporary. He uses his healing tears to bring her back, but the act itself is irreversible in its psychological impact. Steven, the boy who resolved every conflict through love and empathy, has destroyed another living being with his bare hands. And the horror of it, the shock and guilt and revulsion, does not come from the violence itself. It comes from the recognition. Because in that moment, Steven sees himself clearly, perhaps for the first time. He sees that the anger was always there. Beneath the smiles, beneath the empathy, beneath the fawning and the helping and the healing, the anger was there, and it is enormous. This is is a psychological reality that many people who have experienced complex trauma will recognize. The fawn response does not eliminate anger, it buries it, and buried anger does not decompose. It ferments, it grows, it becomes something dense and volatile, waiting for a crack in the containment. And when it finally breaks free, it is disproportionate to the immediate trigger because it is not a response to the immediate trigger. It is a response to everything. Every time they were hurt and smiled, every time they were scared and comforted someone else, every time they needed help and did not ask, all of it comes out at once, and the person who has always been the kindest person in the room becomes, for a terrifying moment, the most dangerous. The aftermath of the shattering is equally significant. When Jasper reforms, she does not react with anger or fear. She kneels before Steven and calls him her diamond. This is perhaps the cruelest possible outcome for Steven. He wanted to feel powerful. He wanted to feel in control, and instead, he has become the thing he feared most. He has become a tyrant. He has become his mother. He has become the diamonds. The violence did not liberate him. It confirmed his worst fear about himself. And this connects to one of the most complex psychological themes in the entire series: the fear of becoming your abuser. Steven has spent years grappling with the legacy of his mother, Rose Quartz, who was also Pink Diamond. Rose was complicated. She was capable of great love and great cruelty. She shattered Pink Diamond, or rather, she was Pink Diamond, and she allowed the other diamonds to believe she had been shattered, triggering a war and a corruption blast that destroyed countless gems. She lied, she manipulated, she abandoned people who loved her, and she also created Steven out of genuine love. Steven has always carried the weight of his mother's actions. He has been blamed for them, held accountable for them, expected to answer for them, and he has always tried to be different, better, kinder. He has built his entire identity around being the opposite of what his mother was, and now in the moment of shattering Jasper, that identity collapses. Because he has done the thing he swore he would never do, he has used his power to destroy. He has become the diamond, and Jasper's kneeling is the final confirmation. The person he fears becoming is the person he has become. This is the concept of introjection, the unconscious internalization of a feared identity. People who grow up with abusive or harmful caregivers often develop an intense fear of becoming like those caregivers. They spend enormous psychic energy trying to be different, trying to be better, constructing an identity that is the opposite of the person they fear. But the very intensity of that effort can become its own trap, because the feared identity is not external. It is internal. It is part of them, woven into their psyche through years of exposure. And when stress or crisis strips away the carefully constructed opposite identity, the feared self can emerge with terrifying force. Steven's shattering of Jasper is the emergence of the feared self. It is the moment when the hero becomes the villain, when the healer becomes the destroyer, when the boy who resolved everything through love uses his power to kill. And it is devastating not because it is out of character, but because some part of Steven always knew it was there. The anger, the power, the capacity for violence. It was always there, hidden beneath the smiles and the healing and the empathy. And now it is out, and he cannot put it back. The episode that follows, Homeworld Bound, sees Steven travelling to Homeworld to seek help from the diamonds. He is desperate. He is losing control of his powers. He is terrified of what he might do next. And on Homeworld, he encounters White Diamond, who has developed a reversed version of her powers. Instead of controlling other gems, she now allows other gems to take control of her, to see things from their perspective. She offers this to Steven. She lets him enter her body and experience himself from her perspective. And what Steven sees horrifies him. He sees himself as a diamond. He sees the pink glow. He sees the power. He sees, reflected in White Diamond's consciousness, the version of himself that he fears most. And he reacts with violence, nearly shattering White Diamond before he catches himself and flees. The pattern is repeating. The fight response is getting stronger. The fawn response is gone. And Steven is spiraling toward a crisis that no amount of empathy or compassion can prevent. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And now we arrive at episode 19, I Am My Monster, the penultimate episode episode of the series, the culmination of everything we have been discussing, the moment when the body finally says what the mind cannot process. Steven corrupts. The corruption of gems is established early in the Steven universe lore. It is what happens when a gem is subjected to an attack so overwhelming, so devastating, that their form cannot maintain its coherence. The diamonds unleashed a corruption attack on Earth at the end of the Gem War, and it transformed the remaining crystal gems into mindless monsters, their forms twisted into monstrous shapes that bore no resemblance to their original selves. The body, unable to process the trauma, collapses into something unrecognizable. Steven's corruption is the human gem equivalent of a complete psychological breakdown. It is what happens when every defense mechanism fails. The fawning has stopped working, the denial has crumbled, the fight response has led to violence that horrified him. The freeze response cannot contain the flood of emotions. There is nowhere left to go, and so the body does the only thing it has left. It transforms. It becomes the monster that Steven has been calling himself, the monster that he believes he is. The creature that Steven becomes is enormous. It is pink and reptilian, with massive horns and a gaping mouth. It towers over Beach City, roaring, destroying everything in its path. And it is, in its terrible way, an honest expression of everything Steven has been feeling. The rage, the grief, the shame, the fear, the loneliness. All of the emotions that he suppressed, denied, fawned over, and fought against are now made flesh. He is the monster. He is his monster. This is the clinical reality of a breakdown made visible. When a person with CPTSD reaches their limit, when every coping mechanism has been exhausted, the result can look like a kind of psychic explosion. Therapists call it decompensation, the failure of the defense mechanisms that have been holding the personality together. The person may become violent, they may become catatonic, they may engage in self-destructive behavior, they may do things that are completely inconsistent with their usual character, things that shock the people who know them, things that shock them most of all. Because the person who emerges in a breakdown is not who they usually are. It is the shadow self, the repository of everything that has been denied and suppressed, and it is terrifying precisely because it has been denied for so long. The concept of decompensation is important here, so let us sit with it for a moment. In psychiatry, decompensation refers to the deterioration of a previously functioning individual, typically under stress. The defense mechanisms that have been keeping the person functional begin to fail one by one, like rivets popping out of a hull under pressure. And when enough rivets have failed, the hull breaches, the person's outward functioning collapses, and the internal chaos that they have been containing spills out into the world. For Steven, the decompensation has been happening gradually throughout Future. Each episode peels away another layer of defense. Little Homeschool strips away his role as helper. Together Forever strips away his romantic fantasy of merger with Connie. Growing Pain strips away his ignorance of his own condition. Mr. Universe strips away his idealization of his father. Fragment strips away his identity as a non-violent person. Everything's Fine strips away his denial, and I Am My Monster strips away everything else. The last defense is the body itself, the physical form, and when that gives way, what emerges is the raw, unmediated truth of his pain. The monster is not a metaphor in the usual sense. It is not a symbol of something else. It is the thing itself. It is trauma made flesh. It is the physical manifestation of an internal reality that has been invisible for too long, and its size, its enormity, its overwhelming presence is proportional to the amount of pain that has been suppressed. Steven's monster is huge because Steven's pain is huge. It towers over Beach City because the trauma towers over everything else in his life. It is inescapable and all-consuming and terrifying because that is what unprocessed trauma is. That is what it feels like from the inside. Steven's corruption is that shadow self. It is every angry word he swallowed. It is every tear he did not shed. It is every moment he needed help and did not ask. It is the accumulated weight of a childhood spent saving the world while no one saved him. And it is devastating to watch. Not because of the destruction, but because you can see in the monster's eyes that Steven is still in there. trapped, screaming, unable to reach the surface. The crystal gems try to fight the monster. They try to reason with it. They try everything they know, and nothing works. Because this is not a villain to be defeated. This is a person in crisis. And you do not heal a crisis with force. It is Connie who figures it out. Connie, who has always been Steven's equal, his partner, the one person who relates to him not as a hero or a savior, but as a person. Connie stops the fighting. She stops the strategizing. She tells everyone what Steven needs. Not combat, not solutions, not fixing, just presence, just love, just the willingness to sit with someone in their worst moment and say, I see you and I am not leaving. And so they climb. The gems, Greg, the diamonds, Connie, everyone who loves Steven. They climb the monster. They reach his face and they hold him. They wrap their arms around the creature that he has become, and they do not try to change him. They do not try to fix him. They just hold him and they cry. There is something important to note about the way the show stages the embrace. It does not happen immediately. The gems and the diamonds try to fight the monster first. They try to reason with him. They try strategy and tactics and power. They try to solve the problem the way they have always solved problems, through action, through force, through doing something, and none of it works. Because this is not a problem that can be solved through doing. This is a problem that can only be addressed through being present, through being still, through being, in the most fundamental sense, with another person in their pain. Connie is the one who understands this, and it matters that it is Connie, because Connie has always been the person who sees Steven most clearly. She does not idealize him. She does not depend on him. She does not need him to be the hero or the healer. She likes him, just him, the person, not the function. And because she sees him clearly, she can see what he needs when no one else can. He does not need to be fought. He does not need to be fixed. He needs to be held. The embrace is not a cure. The show is very careful about this. It does not present the hug as the solution to Steven's trauma. It presents it as the intervention that stops the crisis. It is triage. It is the emotional equivalent of a tourniquet. It stops the bleeding. But the wound beneath still needs treatment. Still needs time, still needs professional care. The embrace saves Steven's life. It does not heal his trauma. That distinction is critical, and the show maintains it with remarkable discipline. This is, in clinical terms, the power of unconditional positive regard, a concept from the work of the psychologist Carl Rogers. Unconditional positive regard is the practice of accepting and supporting a person regardless of what they do or say. It is not approval, it is not agreement. It is a deeper, more fundamental statement. I see who you are in this moment. I see the worst of you, and I am still here. For a person with PTSD, unconditional positive regard is often the thing they need most and trust least, because their entire life has taught them that love is conditional, that they are loved for what they do, not for who they are. That if they stop being useful, stop being helpful, stop being good, the love will disappear. Steven's corruption is, in a sense, a test of this belief. He's become the worst version of himself. He's become a literal monster. And if the people who love him can still love him in this form, then maybe, just maybe, the belief is wrong. Maybe love is not conditional. Maybe he does not have to earn it. Maybe he is worthy of it simply because he exists. There is a detail in the staging of this scene that is worth noting. The gems, the diamonds, Greg, Connie, they do not just hug the monster, they climb it. They make their way up the enormous creature, step by step, handhold by handhold, until they reach his face. This is not just a dramatic choice, it is a metaphor for the work of reaching someone in crisis. It is hard, it is frightening, it takes effort, it requires you to be physically close to something that could hurt you, and it requires persistence, the willingness to keep climbing even when the creature roars and thrashes and tries to shake you off. This is what it is like to love someone who is in the grip of a breakdown. It is not romantic, it is not gentle, it is terrifying and exhausting, and there is no guarantee that it will work, but the climbing matters matters, the effort matters, the willingness to approach the monster, to see the person inside the monster, to reach out even when reaching out puts you at risk. That is what love looks like in its most tested form, not the easy love of good times and shared laughter, the hard love of crisis and fear, and the radical, irrational decision to move toward pain instead of away from it. And there is something else embedded in this scene that deserves attention. Steven does not save himself. This is a crucial departure from the pattern of the original series, where Steven was always the one doing the saving. In I Am My Monster, Steven is the one who needs saving. He is the damsel, he is the victim, he is the person in the tower, and the people who love him are the ones who climb to reach him. This role reversal is essential to the show's message, because it says that the person who has always been the strongest can also be the most vulnerable. That needing to be saved is not weakness. That allowing others to save you is not failure. It is trust. And trust for a person with CPTSD is the hardest thing of all. The embrace works. Slowly, Steven shrinks. The monster dissolves. The pink fades. And Steven, human Steven, small and fragile and weeping, emerges from the wreckage. He is held by everyone who loves him, standing on the open palm of the cluster, surrounded by the evidence of his destruction. And he is, for the first time in a very long time, not performing, not helping, not healing, not fawning. He is just there, broken and present, and finally allowing himself to be held. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final episode of Steven Universe Future is called The Future, and it is, in many ways, the quietest episode of the entire series. There are no battles, there are no villains, there are no cosmic scale conflicts. There is just a boy, a young man, deciding what to do next. Steven decides to leave Beach City. He packs his things. He says goodbye to the Gems, to Greg, to Connie, to the town that has been his home for his entire life, and he drives away. This is not presented as a triumph. It is not presented as a defeat. It is presented as a choice. The choice to leave, the choice to seek help, the choice to go somewhere new, somewhere that is not saturated with memories, and to begin the long, slow, unglamorous work of healing. There is no scene of Steven sitting in a therapist's office. There is no montage of recovery. There is no neat resolution, no moment where Steven is fixed and everything is fine. The show understands, with remarkable maturity, that healing from complex trauma is not a single moment. It is a process. It takes years. It takes professional help. It takes distance from the environment in which the trauma occurred. And it is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It is small and daily, and often boring. The steady accumulation of healthier habits, healthier relationships, healthier ways of being in the world. Steven choosing to leave Beach City is Steven choosing himself. For the first time in his life, he is not making a decision based on what other people need. He is making a decision based on what he needs. He needs space. He needs distance. He needs the freedom to figure out who he is when he is not saving the world, when he is not the healer, the helper, the person everyone depends on. He needs to find out if there is a Steven who exists outside of that role. And that search, that terrifying and necessary search, requires him to leave. This is the therapeutic concept of individuation. The process by which a person, particularly a person who has been enmeshed with their family or their role, develops a separate, autonomous sense of self. For parentified children, individuation is often delayed or derailed because their sense of self is so thoroughly intertwined with their caregiver role that separating from it feels like dying. It feels like abandoning the people they love. It feels selfish and wrong and dangerous. Steven's goodbye to the Gems is beautiful because it captures this tension. He loves them, they love him, and he is leaving anyway, not because the love is insufficient, but because the love, as it has been configured, is part of the problem. The Gems love Steven the helper, Steven the healer, Steven the person who holds them together, and Steven needs to find out if he can be loved as just Steven. Steven the person, Steven the individual, Steven who does not have a role or a function or a cosmic purpose, just a kid trying to figure out his life. The Gems Victims struggle with this. They do not want him to go. They worry about him. They try to hide their sadness so as not to burden him. And in doing so, they inadvertently recreate the dynamic that hurt him in the first place. The dynamic in which everyone manages their emotions to protect Steven, and Steven manages his emotions to protect everyone else. And no one is actually being honest about how they feel, but they get there. They have a real conversation. They cry real tears. They tell Steven that they love him, not for what he does, but for who he is. And they let him go. Not because it is easy, but because it is right. Because loving someone sometimes means letting them leave. Because holding on too tightly is just another form of control. Because the bravest thing you can do for someone you love is to trust them to take care of themselves. There is a detail in this finale that is easy to miss but deeply significant. Steven mentions that he plans to travel to all 39 states. In the Steven universe world, there are 39 states rather than 50, but the number is less important than the intention. Steven is not running away. He is moving towards something. He has a plan, however loose. He is going to travel. He is going to see the country. He is going to exist in spaces that do not know his name, that do not carry the weight of his history, that do not expect him to be anyone other than who he is in that moment. This is what therapists sometimes call a geographic cure, and it is often spoken about with skepticism because changing your location does not change your psychology. You bring yourself wherever you go. But for Steven, the geography is not the point. The point is the act of choosing. The point is that for the first time in his life, Steven is making a decision that is entirely about himself, not about the gems, not about Beach City, not about the fate of the galaxy. About him, what he wants, what he needs, where he wants to go. These are questions he has never been allowed to ask, and the act of asking them, even without answers, is itself a form of healing. There is something profound about the simplicity of this ending. After 5 seasons of epic battles and universe-saving heroics, the final act of the entire franchise is a boy getting in a car, not a spaceship, not a warp pad, a car, a human machine for a human journey. Steven is not warping to another galaxy. He is not fighting a final boss. He is driving down a road, like any other person, headed towards something he cannot see but knows he needs. The mundanity of it is the point. Healing is not epic. It is ordinary. It is 1 foot in front of the other, 1 mile at a time, 1 day at a time. It is also worth noting that the show never explicitly states that Steven is going to therapy. Some viewers interpret his departure as seeking professional help, and that interpretation is supported by the show's themes. But the show itself leaves it open, and that openness is respectful. It says that the specific form of healing is personal and private. What matters is the decision to pursue it. What matters is the willingness to prioritize yourself. What matters is the first step, which is always the hardest. Steven drives away from Beach City in his car, passing the landmarks of his childhood, the big donut, the beach, the temple. Everyone is there to wave goodbye, and the camera pulls back and the town gets smaller, and the road stretches out ahead, and the screen fades, and the show is over. It is perhaps the bravest ending a children's show has ever had, because it does not offer the audience the comfort of resolution. It does not say, Steven is okay now. It says Steven is choosing to try to be okay, and that is enough. That is, in fact, everything. Let us sit with that for a moment. Let us sit with the idea that choosing to seek help is itself an act of heroism, because our culture does not frame it that way. Our culture frames heroism as strength, as action, as the willingness to fight and sacrifice and endure. Steven has done all of those things. He has fought monsters and healed the broken and saved the universe. But the bravest thing he ever does is admit that he is not okay and leave home to find someone who can help him figure out why. This is the message of Steven Universe Future. Not that trauma can be healed through love alone, although love is a necessary part of healing. Not that the right embrace at the right moment can undo years of damage, although connection is essential. The message is that healing is a choice, that it requires action, that it requires professional help. that it requires the willingness to walk away from the life you know and into the uncertainty of the life you need, and that this choice, this unglamorous, undramatic, deeply personal choice, is the most important one you will ever make. Rebecca Sugar and the team behind Steven Universe Future created something extraordinary. They took a children's cartoon, a show about a boy with a magical belly button, and they used it to tell one of the most honest stories about trauma and recovery that has ever been told in any medium. They did not simplify it. They did not sugarcoat it. They did not offer easy answers or magical cures. They showed the mess. They showed the pain. They showed the ugliness of a person in crisis, the monstrousness of unchecked emotion, the terror of losing control. And then they showed the way out, not through fighting, not through magical powers, not through heroic sacrifice, through help, through connection, through the willingness to be vulnerable, through therapy. And I think it is worth reflecting for just a moment on what it means that this story was told by Rebecca Sugar and the creative team at Cartoon Network Studios. Sugar has been open about the personal nature of this story. She has spoken about her own experiences with trauma, about the way her assault at 22 left marks that were not visible but were very real. She has spoken about the research that informed the show, about Burke Harris's work and the ACE study, and the clinical literature on complex trauma. And she has spoken about why she felt it was important to tell this story in a children's show. The answer, in essence, is because children need it. Children are not exempt from trauma. Children experience adverse childhood experiences at alarming rates. The original ACE study found that nearly 2/3 of participants had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, and more than 1 in 5 had experienced 3 or more. These are not rare occurrences. These are common realities, and the children who experience them need to see their experiences reflected in the media they consume. They need to know that what they are going through has a name. They need to know that it is not their fault, and they need to know that healing is possible. Steven Universe Future provides all of this. It provides a language for pain. It provides a framework for understanding. It provides, most importantly, a model for what it looks like to choose healing, not a triumphant, cinematic model, a quiet, honest, frightening model. The model of a person who is scared and hurting and does not know what comes next, but who gets in a car and drives toward the possibility of something better. There is also something to be said about the show's treatment of the people around Steven, the people who love him and who in many ways contributed to his trauma without meaning to. The show does not demonize them. It does not let them off the hook either. It holds both truths simultaneously. The Gems loved Steven and failed him. Greg loved Steven and failed him. These are not contradictions. They are the reality of human relationships and gem relationships, and any relationship that involves imperfect beings trying their best in impossible circumstances. This nuance is essential because it mirrors the experience of many trauma survivors. The people who hurt us are often the people who love us. The environments that traumatized us are often the environments that shaped us. We do not get to choose uncomplicated stories. We do not get to have villains who are purely villainous and heroes who are purely heroic. We get Greg, who lived in a van and loved his son fiercely and never took him to a doctor. We get Pearl, who mourned Rose for thousands of years and leaned on a child for emotional support. We get Garnet, who was steady and strong and somehow never noticed that the boy in her care was drowning. The show asks us to hold all of this, to love these characters and to see their failures, to understand their motivations and to acknowledge their impact, and to recognize that love by itself is not enough. Love is necessary. Love is the foundation. But love without awareness, love without boundaries, love without the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths can be its own kind of harm. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one aspect of the finale that we have not yet discussed, and it is the role of the cluster. When Steven corrupts, he is eventually brought back to human form while standing on the open palm of the cluster, the massive forced fusion of millions of gem shards that once threatened to destroy the Earth. In the original series, Steven befriended the cluster, calmed it, helped it find peace within itself, and now in his worst moment, the cluster returns the favor. It rises from the depths of the earth and offers its palm as a platform, as a place for Steven to be held. This is a beautiful narrative detail, but it is also a psychological one. The cluster represents something important in the context of Steven's healing. It represents the idea that the help you give others does not disappear. It accumulates. It creates a network of support that can sustain you when you need it most, even if you do not know how to ask for it. Steven spent years helping others, and the cost of that helping was enormous. But the connections he formed, the lives he changed, the beings he healed, those things are real, and they can hold him, literally, when he can no longer hold himself. This is not to say that Steven's trauma was worth it because of the connections it produced. That would be a toxic and harmful message. Trauma is never worth it. Trauma is never justified by its outcomes. But the show makes a subtler point. It says that the relationships you form along the way, even the relationships that were born from pain, can become sources of genuine support. The people who love you can be part of your healing, even if they were also part of the environment that hurt you. This is not a contradiction. It is the complex, messy reality of human connection. Let us talk about what Steven Universe Future teaches us about how children's media can address mental health responsibly. Because there is a version of this story that could have gone very wrong. There is a version that sensationalizes trauma, that reduces complex psychological phenomena to dramatic plot points, that wraps everything up neatly and sends the audience home with the false impression that healing is a montage and recovery is a single transformative moment. Steven Universe Future does none of this. It earns every emotional beat. It takes its time. It does not rush to the crisis, and it does not rush through the aftermath. It spends episodes, plural, establishing the slow build of Steven's deterioration. It shows the small moments, the micro-expressions, the subtle shifts in behaviour that signal that something is wrong. It respects its audience enough to trust that they will notice. And when the crisis comes, it does not shy away from the ugliness of it. Steven does not have a graceful breakdown. He shatters another living being. He nearly attacks White Diamond. He corrupts into a monster. These are not sanitized depictions of struggle. They are honest ones. And then the recovery is equally honest. Steven does not bounce back. He does not have a single cathartic moment and then return to normal. He has a breakdown, and then he has a quiet conversation with the people he loves, and then he packs a bag and drives away to get help. The show does not show the therapy. It does not show the recovery. It lets those things happen off screen, in the privacy that Steven has earned, and it trusts the audience to understand that the real work is just beginning. This is revolutionary for children's television, not because children's shows have never addressed mental health, but because very few have addressed it with this level of sophistication and honesty. Steven Universe Future does not use mental health as a very special episode. It does not treat trauma as a plot device to be resolved and forgotten. It makes trauma the central subject of the entire series, and it follows that subject to its logical, uncomfortable, deeply human conclusion. There is also the matter of the show's pacing, which deserves recognition. Steven Universe Future does not rush its psychological narrative. The deterioration happens slowly, across multiple episodes, with each one adding another crack to the facade. The first few episodes feel almost normal. Steven is struggling, but he is coping. He is managing. And then gradually the coping mechanisms begin to fail. The pink episodes become more frequent. The outbursts become more intense. The smile becomes harder to maintain. By the time we reach the 4-part finale, the collapse feels inevitable. Not because it was predictable, but because the show has laid the groundwork so carefully that looking back you can see every step that led to this point. This pacing mirrors the actual trajectory of a mental health crisis. Breakdowns do not happen overnight. They are the culmination of a long, slow process of deterioration, a process that is often invisible to everyone, including the person experiencing it. The person functions until they do not. They cope until they cannot, and the moment of crisis, when it finally arrives, feels both sudden and inevitable. The show captures this paradox with extraordinary skill, and in doing so, it teaches its audience something valuable about recognizing the warning signs of psychological distress in themselves and in the people they love. The show also avoids the trap of presenting a single, universal model of healing. Steven's path is his path. The show does not say, "This is how you recover from trauma." It says, "This is how Steven is beginning to recover from trauma." And by making it specific and personal, it paradoxically makes it more universal, because everyone's healing journey is different, and the most honest thing a show can do is admit that. There is something else worth noting about the way Future handles Steven's mental health, and it is related to the concept of somatization that we discussed earlier. The show makes Steven's internal states visible through his powers. His body turns pink when he is stressed. He swells when he is overwhelmed. He creates barriers when he is afraid. This is a brilliant narrative device because it makes the invisible visible. It takes the internal experience of emotional dysregulation and gives it a physical, observable form, but it also serves a deeper purpose. It normalizes the connection between emotional and physical health. It teaches its audience, many of whom are young people experiencing stress and anxiety for the first time, that what you feel emotionally can and does affect your body. That the stomachache before a test, and the headache after a fight, and the muscle tension during a stressful conversation are not unrelated to your emotions. They are your emotions. They are your body keeping the score. There is a related concept in trauma therapy called somatic experiencing, developed by the psychologist Peter Levine. Somatic experiencing is based on the observation that animals in the wild who are regularly exposed to life-threatening situations do not develop PTSD. After a near-death experience, a gazelle will literally shake, trembling all over as its body discharges the stress energy that accumulated during the encounter with a predator, and then it walks away and goes back to grazing as if nothing happened. The shaking is the body completing the stress cycle, releasing the stored energy so that it does not become trapped. Humans, Levine argued, have lost this ability. Our prefrontal cortex, our rational mind, interrupts the body's natural discharge process. We suppress the shaking. We override the impulse to cry or scream or move. We tell ourselves to be strong, to hold it together, to not make a scene. And the stress energy, denied its natural outlet, becomes trapped in the body. It becomes chronic tension, chronic pain, chronic hyperarousal. It becomes the body keeping the score. Steven's corruption can be understood through this lens. It is the body's attempt to complete a stress cycle that has been interrupted thousands of times. Every battle, every injury, every moment of terror that Steven smiled through without processing, all of that accumulated stress energy has to go somewhere, and in the corruption, it goes everywhere at once. The body, denied its natural release for so long, explodes. The shaking that should have happened after every mission, the tears that should have been shed after every near-death experience, the screaming that should have accompanied every moment of fear, all of it comes out at once, transformed into something enormous and monstrous and overwhelming. For young viewers who may be experiencing anxiety, depression, or the effects of their own adverse childhood experiences, this is an incredibly valuable lesson. It gives them a framework for understanding their own bodies. It says, if you feel stressed and your stomach hurts, those two things are connected. If you feel scared and your heart races, that is your body responding to your emotions. And if these responses are happening all the time, if your body is stuck in fight or flight, if you feel like you are always about to die even when you are safe, that is not your fault. That is your body trying to protect you, and there are people who can help. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Let us return one final time to that image. Steven in the doctor's office, his shirt pulled up, his gem exposed, the x-rays on the wall, Dr. Maheswaran's face. This is the moment when Steven Universe Future stops being a cartoon and becomes a clinical case study. This is the moment when the show says, we are not being metaphorical, we are not being abstract. We are telling you, in the clearest possible terms, that this character has been through real trauma, and that it has left real marks on his body, and that he needs real help. And it is a moment that happens, crucially, not through Steven's own insight, but through the observation of a medical professional. Steven does not diagnose himself. He does not have a sudden moment of clarity. He sits on an examination table, confused and scared, and a doctor tells him what is happening to him. She puts a name on it. She uses clinical language. She talks about adverse childhood experiences and chronic stress responses. She treats him not as a magical being or a hero or a diamond, but as a patient, as a person who is hurt and needs care. This is significant because it models something that many people, particularly people who have experienced trauma, are reluctant to do. It models the act of going to a professional and hearing the truth about your own condition. It models the vulnerability of sitting in an office and saying, "Something is wrong with me, and I do not know what it is." It shows that the doctor does not judge. She does not dismiss. She does not tell Steven to toughen up or get over it. She takes him seriously. She examines him. She explains what she finds. And she treats his trauma as what it is, a medical condition that deserves medical attention. For a show aimed at young people, this is an incredibly powerful message. It says that mental health is health, that trauma is not a character flaw, that asking for help from a professional is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of wisdom, and that there are people out there whose entire job is to help you understand and heal from the things that have happened to you. Steven Universe. Future is not a perfect show. No show is. But it is a show that took an enormous risk and executed it with extraordinary care. It took a beloved character, a character who had been defined by his kindness and his warmth and his magical ability to make everything better, and it showed that character breaking. Not because the writers ran out of ideas, not because they wanted to create drama for its own sake, but because the breaking was always the logical next step. Because you cannot put a child through what Steven went through and expect him to emerge unscathed. Because trauma does not disappear when the villain is defeated. Because the body keeps the score. And then, having broken him, the show did something even braver. It showed him choosing to heal, not through a magical cure, not through a heroic sacrifice, not through the love of his friends, although that love was essential, through the quiet, unglamorous decision to get in a car and drive to a place where he could get help, through the acknowledgement that he could not do it alone, through the acceptance that needing help is not a failure. That is the story of Steven Universe Future. It is a story about a boy who saved the world and then had to save himself. And the second task was harder than the first. There is one more thing I want to discuss before we close, and it is about the In Dreams episode. In this episode, Steven's dreams start broadcasting onto his television. The crystal gems can literally see what is happening inside his subconscious mind, and what they see is disturbing. Steven's dreams are not peaceful. They are not the dreams of a person at rest. They are fractured, anxious, filled with images of loss and inadequacy and fear. The show takes the invisible landscape of Steven's inner world and makes it visible, again, just as it does with his pink episodes and his corruption. This is another example of the show's commitment to making the invisible visible, because one of the cruelest aspects of complex trauma is its invisibility. The person suffering from it often looks fine. They function, they get through the day, they interact with others, and the people around them, even the people who love them, often have no idea what is happening beneath the surface. Steven's dreams being broadcast are a narrative device, yes, but they are also a statement about the hidden nature of psychological pain. If the gems could have seen Steven's inner world earlier, if they could have seen what was really going on inside him, perhaps they would have acted sooner. Perhaps they would have realized that the boy who was holding them together was falling apart. But they could not see, because trauma hides, because the people who carry it are often the best at concealing it, because the fawn response, by its very nature, involves the construction of a facade that is designed to convince everyone that nothing is wrong. Steven was a master at this. He smiled, he sang, he helped, and no one knew, not even Steven himself, that underneath the performance everything was collapsing. And this connects to a broader point about the nature of healing itself. In our culture, we tend to think of healing as a return to a previous state. You were healthy, you got sick, you healed, and now you are healthy again. But trauma does not work that way. You cannot return to who you were before the trauma because the trauma has changed you. The person you were before no longer exists. Healing from complex complex trauma is not about going back, it is about going forward. It is about building a new self, a self that incorporates the trauma without being defined by it, a self that is different from who you were before but is, in its own way, whole. Steven cannot go back to being the cheerful, uncomplicated boy of the early seasons. That boy was a performance, and even if it were not, the experiences he has been through have changed him at a fundamental level. His brain is different, his nervous system is different, his understanding of himself and the world is different. Healing for Steven will not mean becoming the old Steven again. It will mean becoming a new Steven, a Steven who carries his trauma with awareness rather than denial, a Steven who has tools for managing his emotional responses, a Steven who can form relationships that are not based on crisis or codependency, a Steven who knows who he is, not because of what he does for others, but because of who he is for himself. This is the hardest and most hopeful message of Steven Universe Future. That you are not your trauma, that your trauma is something that happened to you, not something that defines you, and that with help, with time, with the willingness to do the unglamorous daily work of recovery, you can build a life that is not governed by your pain. It will not be the life you had before, it will be something new, and new, the show suggests, can be beautiful. This is why professional help matters. This is why therapy matters, because a trained therapist can see through the facade. They can recognize the signs of complex trauma. They can name the patterns, the fawning, the parentification, the hypervigilance, the dissociation, and by naming them, they can begin to disarm them. Steven needed someone who could see him clearly, someone who was not a family member, not a friend, not a magical alien. He needed a professional, and the show's ending, his departure from Beach City, is the acknowledgement that this is what he is going toward. The night is getting late, and if you are still here, whether you are awake or drifting, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. We have covered a lot of ground tonight. We have talked about CPTSD and parentification. We have talked about the fawn response and compassion fatigue. We have talked about somatization and emotional dysregulation. We have talked about denial and dissociation and the terrible, liberating moment when all the defenses come down at once. We have talked about the body and the score it keeps and the possibility of healing. And through all of it, we have been talking about Steven, a boy made of love and trauma in equal measure, a boy who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and forgot to notice that it was crushing him, a boy who healed everyone except himself. But we have also been talking about something larger. We have been talking about the way that stories can serve as mirrors, the way that a cartoon about magical space rocks can hold up a reflection of something deeply, profoundly human, the way that seeing your own pain depicted on screen, validated and taken seriously and treated with compassion, can be the first step toward understanding it. Steven Universe Future is that mirror, and for the people who need it, it is exactly the right one. And perhaps that is the greatest gift that Rebecca Sugar gave us. Not a show about a boy with superpowers, not a show about magical space rocks, not even a show about saving the universe. She gave us a show about the most ordinary, most human, most universal experience there is. The experience of being hurt, the experience of carrying that hurt in your body and your bones and your breath, the experience of not knowing how to ask for help, and the experience of finally, slowly, painfully learning how. Every child who watches Steven Universe Future and recognizes something of themselves in Steven's pain is a child who has been given a gift. The gift of recognition, the gift of being seen, the gift of knowing that they are not alone, that their feelings are not wrong, that the things their body does in response to stress are not weaknesses but adaptations, survival mechanisms that kept them alive in impossible circumstances, and the gift of knowing that those adaptations, once necessary, can be outgrown, that there are new ways of being in the world, that the body can learn a different score. So wherever you are tonight, whatever you are carrying, whatever score your body is keeping, I hope you find some peace in knowing that the journey toward healing is not one you have to take alone, that there are people who can help, that there is no shame in needing them, and that choosing to seek help is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for caring about a story that cares so deeply about you. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.